You are listening to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, episode 144, Monetization in D&D. In today's episode, we discuss how D&D is moving towards monetization in the future. We discuss the history of the open gaming license through different iterations of D&D. We also discuss the attempts to change the license and the possible future for the next edition of D&D. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me virtually, I've got the birthday boy, Josh. How you doing today, Josh?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Well, soon to be birthday boy. So
yeah, I got a couple of days. I noticed that we're getting close to 150 episodes.
We are getting close to 150 episodes. This doesn't count the little like onesie twosie things where I explained the status of the podcast. These are actual 150 real episodes, and we're gonna do a nice little kind of celebration every 50 episodes. To do that here with Josh, we're going to talk about a nice little subject, and we'll come up with something clever. We'll try to work it out. If you got a suggestion for it, levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. We'll take that into consideration, or you can comment on the episode, facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. But yeah, no, we're getting close there. The podcast has been going strong. This is actually the third year that I've been doing it now. So you are just in the start of it. Believe me, once we get back to like October, you'll be like, hey, I've been here for a year.
No, it's good. No, I was really happy to see that it's going good. The thing is, you talk about things that go on for a long time. Sometimes there's format changes.
What happened to your mic?
Did you not hear me?
What happened to it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, what'd you hear?
It sounded like your entire, like you were going through like a different computer mic.
Maybe. Okay. What was the last thing that sounded fine?
You started talking about that things are changing, and I was like, and then you just became like breaker. This is Josh here on the.
Okay.
So if you want to put down the CB radio, Josh, and pick up your regular heads,
I will attempt to do so.
Sorry, you were saying.
I don't remember. Oh, okay. So usually when things are going on for a long period of time, sometimes you get format changes. You get changes that are made to the subject matter or how things are run. And it's nice to see that, the changes that have gone around here have been mostly for the positive. And I'd like to keep it that way. Sort of help out things going in a good direction.
Yes. We want things to continue to move in the right direction. And this brings us to kind of an interesting subject, which is when Josh joined the podcast, he added a bunch of future episode topics, and one of them jumped on this one thing that's I guess it's been going on for like the last 2-3 months. Has been the board meeting that happened with Wizards of the Coast and talked about the monetization of D&D, and basically specifically the changes to their open gaming license, which is what they're trying to do. Now, before we dive into this, they've since kind of blown all this up, but it's important to talk about because of where they're kind of going in the future. So I'll let you go into the history of it, Josh.
Okay. So with 1D&D, sort of going through its playtest stages, they're releasing the stuff. We talked about this last year with one of the first things that they posted, going through and seeing what was interesting about it. One of the things they announced was that they were going to make a change to the OGL. Now, if you don't know what the OGL is, back in 2000, when Wizards of the Coast released D&D Third Ed, they made a open gaming license, or OGL, that they then released the systems reference document through the SRD. The SRD is sort of like the core part of the game. And the reason they did this was they thought that third-party publishers could go out and they can use this base design for the game to make their own supplemental material. This would leave Wizards to focus on the main product, the main story, the main books, and they wouldn't have to do all these little supplementals that might cost them more money than they would get in return. And it would grow the company. It would grow the brand. And it did really well. You've got a lot of supplemental materials out there nowadays that wouldn't have existed without this. But what they hadn't thought about was that some people used the OGL, this open gaming license, without the SRD and made their own games, utilizing some of the basic standards of like how dice work and how stats work and stuff like that, without actually making a D&D supplemental. Now, the original OGL only lasted for about, it's still in effect today, but it was replaced for 4th Ed with something called the GSL, with a game systems license. It was still a royalty-free thing, but there were some changes. They reduced what could be printed. I didn't really look too much into this because that's 4th Ed, and I never played 4th Ed. And the only thing that really came out of it that I thought was fun was that some people hated it so much. They kept the original OGL and made Pathfinder. So Pathfinder was because some people didn't like the changes for 4th Ed. But we don't have to worry about that so much. With 5th Ed, D&D 5th Ed, they re-released it under the original OGL, and that's where it's been sitting to this day. They released 5th Ed and then 5.1 with a little bit of extra stuff. About a month and a half ago, they made an announcement that they were going to be making a change to this open gaming license for 6th Ed, or 1 D&D. And it got leaked. The original change got leaked, and it was bad. Not so much for players, and less so for DMs, but it was definitely bad for publishers and for content creators, because it was asking for royalties. It was there was language in it that made it sound like Wizards could reprint third-party material as their own without paying for it. And there was some requirements for printing the SRD and how you refer to it. The big complaint was that part of the documentation was talking about canceling the old OGL and requiring everybody to use the new one, which was just like a non-starter, and that was going to be all sorts of legal fights. They, after some back and forth and some internet brouhaha, we love the internet brouhaha, don't you, Aaron?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Great. After a bit of that, they went and they put out like a second version of their new OGL. And this is the one that I actually found more interesting. Like, the first one was a bunch of, we want money from our players and we want money from our publishers, and we're going to do what we want, and everybody's got to be under our new thing. But the second one got rid of like all of that and put something else in, which I thought was way more interesting. They put in a whole section about what third-party VTTs were allowed to do with the SRD, the systems reference document, and what they were allowed to do when they were showing Dungeons and Dragons through their VTTs. Specifically, they were talking about how there was no animations for spells or actions, that there was no sound effects, and there was the language in it was talking about how there was nothing that wouldn't exist if you were literally playing at a table. So if I'm sitting there at a table, at your house playing D&D, and I go and I play a VTT, we can't have any additional stuff. Can't have these animations or spells or stuff like that, which I thought was like, okay, why are you doing that? Now, none of this matters uh, in terms of licensing right now because there's so much pushback from all sorts of people, from all sorts of places, that the SRD for Fifth Ed has been released under the Creative Commons license, which means that it is free and clear, including some of the things that weren't available even under the original SRD, specifically certain spells. I think Eldritch Blast was one of them, and the Beholder. Before this was under Creative Commons, if you were using the SRD and doing it on your own reprint, the Beholder was actually the Eyeball Tyrant, a classic D&D villain, the Eyeball Tyrant.
Beholders were always, I know that those are always exclusively D&D. Like, yeah. That was...
well, and that was the whole point, is that they wanted to have, like, their stuff was their stuff, but you could still use the concept and the world of D&D without, specifics. And I thought, and a lot of people did, that it was a really great move 23 years ago. And they did make this change. And why did they make the change? Why do you think they made the change, Aaron?
Well, again, I know why they made the change because I did some research on this whole thing here. Effectively, there was a huge uproar from the community. It's not just... you have to understand that if these changes had gone into effect, it probably would not have affected top-line creators as much as you think it would, because they have lawyers and stuff. They would have had the resources to be able to... this would have been challenged in some way, but they would have had resources to challenge and negotiate their own contracts. So it would have been like giving benefits to like the latest, the biggest and the greatest, but you'd be punishing any small Kickstarter for getting something off the ground effectively. So obviously people were, up in arms about this. And they viewed this as, you can call it corporate greed, you can call it whatever you want to do, but they were very upset with the choice to do this because they thought, and rightfully they thought that everything that they play with would effectively become taken from them effectively. So lots of protests, lots of YouTube videos about it. You mentioned there was pressure from Hollywood. There are Hollywood stars who play D&D. So, there's a lot of this, and you think, Critical Role, one of the bigger, live play, the biggest out to my knowledge, the
reason I put Hollywood up on there is they do have a live action D&D movie coming out at the end of March or May. I should check. It's soon. And if you've got protests going on with your core fan base who are talking about leaving your product because of changes, you're talking about multi-million-dollar movie could just up and go. And then they signed another deal that's with Universal, that Chris Pine movie. Paramount signed a deal with D&D also or Wizards to make a D&D TV show. And you're talking about millions of dollars that could be on the line here, that it's just going to go up in smoke if they don't, pay attention. And yeah, you've got your live plays, you've got your content creators on YouTube and on Twitch. And all these people are worried that if they're talking about having royalties in their OGL, if you play this game and make money off of it, if you make over a certain amount, you've got to pay us. It's kind of taking the fun out of the game.
Anyways, I believe what they ended up doing is they put on on D&D Beyond, they had a survey, and it was like 90% disapproval
Oh yeah.
for most of this stuff. You know, the funny story about this was you can never get a survey to represent 100% in one direction. Somebody will always dissent. Even if it's just because they're just being a jerk to dissent. So they, because I remember ages ago on sports radio here, they put up a poll that said, "Do you like money?" It was like just a yes or a no, and they still couldn't get 100% from.
Yeah. I'm not going to go and say that, 10% of that was internal that they had set, somebody had walked around the cubicles at the offices of Wizards of the Coast and made people click. No, it's good OGL. But I'm not saying that.
I mean, it's like 15,000 respondents in the first bit there, so you'd have to have a lot of employees. I don't think Wizards has 2,000.
No, probably not. I'm not.
So, but still, I digress. There's going to be people who are going to dissent for different reasons, and maybe there's again, had the OGL gone into effect, maybe what would have happened would have been more people publishing through Wizards, so that could have been a direction that this could have ended up going. Obviously, this hasn't gone that way, and we're back to where we started. We're back to a better place than where we started with the fifth ed, because it's under the Creative Commons, so it can't be altered anymore. And so fifth ed is like untouched; it's not going to be touched. That's all good. Now, what happens?
Which actually sort of mirrors a lot of the things that happened when we went from 3 and 3.5 to fourth. Is that people who didn't like fourth just didn't play it. They kept playing 3.5. So if one D&D or sixth ed isn't any good or is restricted in some way, since fifth ed is open and free, people just keep playing it. And I think that's very important to know also.
I mean, this is important too. If you look at most people I've talked about, if you didn't go into kind of the AD&D route from first ed, you probably landed on 2.5. That's where most people I think stayed, and then they jumped into fifth ed if you jumped from there at all. I think most people skipped third and fourth ed, and I mean, I know almost nobody who's played fourth ed, but I think almost everybody skipped third ed or they went back to 2. So again, this is sort of they're gonna make a D&D sixth ed, they're gonna make a D&D seventh ed, 8th, 9th, 10th, whether or not you lived long enough to see the edition that you want to see, it will entirely depend on how old you are when you're listening to this podcast. But, they're going to do it. So.
I think it's important to take a look back at some of the original verbiage that they used when they started talking about 1 D&D. They didn't want to call it sixth ed. And they were talking about it as this will be the final edition. And this will be, the last best blah, 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 blah. And the reason I think that that's important to think about is because of some of these changes that they were releasing with the OGL, with the updated VTT stuff and the details there. Because one of the other things that got leaked during this whole debacle was that the VTT is planned to be sort of its own little Wizards fiefdom, where you have a paid content and microtransactions. And the paid content would be, like a Game Pass, like your standard Game Pass, where you go and you pay a certain amount of money per month, and you get access to like a tiered level of services.
I mean, the subscription model isn't new to anything. Everybody wants a reoccurring revenue model. Okay, I work in IT. The Microsoft, they're trying to move, from server selling to a reoccurring revenue model in terms of hybridizing into the cloud. Okay, Apple has even talked about doing you can do a subscription for your phone, and so you can always get a new phone every year. Okay, which these are things that people have talked about, because once you are part of the reoccurring revenue model, think about it. If you have a million streaming services or anything that you have, you tend to continue to pay for the thing that you already have, because you're like, it's only like $10 a month. It's a cup of coffee every, every
Yeah,
week or something like that. It starts to not think, you start to think differently about it. And it also brings in consistent revenue for a company, which is what they want to do. For the company. So, I mean, you talked about you had their different lower tier, high tier kind of thing, and just kind of their revenue model that they
yeah,
had associated with this. And it's nothing new. This is very common. If you were going to start a business today, you would be thinking about a reoccurring revenue model. Okay, you need to,
absolutely.
because you need to have a way to make money. And their reoccurring revenue model prior to this has been release new editions of D&D.
Well, and they did buy D&D Beyond recently, like in the last year, 2 years, recently, whatever it was. And D&D Beyond has a recurring revenue model, which is probably one of the reasons they bought it. And you go in, you pay a certain amount of money per month, and you can share your whatever books that you've bought through them, through Wizards of the Coast, and you can share those with your players for your game. You can have your character sheets up there. You can, you've got access to uh, the stories and the items and the monsters and all the fun stuff right in there. And there's plugins to let you use D&D Beyond in like Roll20 and some other things. It's actually really nice. I think there's even plugins to work with Foundry. So they bought that, but the pricing was apparently too low. They wanted to go a lot higher. Well, it's a VTT. You're buying a game. You're going to be playing online. You got all your fun stuff in there. So the tiers that were sort of released, that were leaked, the low tier was, simple. You'd have one game at a time. You could have one character at a time. That's fine. That's your standard player. I'm playing a game. I'm not playing 10 games. I'm playing a game. But with the lower tiers, you are not allowed to have any access to any homebrew items or monsters or stuff. You have to play stock stories, which is, this is leaked information. How it would actually work is, who knows? This is just like rumors and weird stuff. But they did talk about the higher tiers, and the higher tiers would be more like $30 a month. Okay, that's access to the VTT, but it also means that you get like monthly content drops and access to some of the other more interesting, weird features they were talking about. And I think the content drops is very interesting for this because, like I said, the original talk about one D&D being the final version of D&D, if they were talking about doing monthly content drops where you've got a game that is, a reoccurring model for profit, a constant update of the system, you'd be more like playing WoW or, an MMO where there's frequent, like big patches that change the game, but it's still the same game throughout that entire process.
The problem with it, if you're going to go in that direction, say, or do one D&D won't be the last one. Even in this model, eventually they're if their base doesn't sustain, they have to come up with a new system to drive interest. It's the same problem with this here, and also the other thing that you have to consider here is that the VTT is going to be competing with existing VTTs, and they're already good VTTs. Okay, we talked about them previously. Go back to that episode, listen to them. But there's three big ones. Okay, and they all do things well. Okay, they handle things correctly, and so to come in with this, you'd have to have a very, very enticing good VTT. It wouldn't have to just be like, well, this is the official Wizards of the Coast VTT. This is like, it's got to be very good. So,
which I think is why they were trying to do two things. First of all, they were, that the second version of the bad OGL was talking about how VTTs that were playing D&D couldn't have animations or sound effects or anything you wouldn't normally see at a table. So they were probably thinking, hey, if we don't let other people do it, but we've got it, now we've got features that you can't get anywhere else. And they had to pull all that, so that's gone. But the second part is, if you are releasing fifth 5.1 under that Creative Commons license. They did not say anything about releasing one D&D under the A Creative Commons license or under the OGL. They were rather vague about that and just gave the 5.1 under that Creative Commons, I think, to stop the argument.
I think this is not the bad press around what they have going on right now. But I mean, all that being said, even if they release the next piece under the Creative Commons license, whether or not what you're banking on, okay, is that you're banking that the success of fifth ed, okay, and the popularity rise of D&D, and I would say that it has gone from being not very popular role-playing games in general, tabletop RPGs, to being significantly more popular as a result of the release of fifth ed and probably the utilization of this open gaming license, that all these people have more people are playing than ever before. Okay. And I understand that the want to get, make sure that we can get money from people who aren't just the GMs effectively. But when you get to that next step there, are you going to be able to convert enough people off of the old game system and entice enough people to try your new D&D MMORPG effectively? Okay. Yeah. Which is where they seem to be going. So if you are going to go, I'm going to skip ahead here, but you said if you are going to try out the new VTT, then you will most likely be able to play the one D&D system. It could be good, could be awful, who knows, because we don't know what their VTT is going to look like. Okay, but what we do know, and it'll probably be backwards compatible with all the other systems of D&D, which would be, that'd be a big, what's the word I'm looking for?
It'd be a boon for the company. It'd be a nice pull for anybody to be able to come in and be able to play some of these old systems.
You're getting some value. That's what I'm looking for.
And they could resell the old books in the VTT, and you'd be like, you've got, at AD&D back from eons ago, and you can resell it because people want to play it. Why not do it? Make money off of that. And I think that if they make a good, at this point, because they've got all this bad press from the OGL and whatnot, they would have to do a really decent job of making this VTT, and probably have to take a look at some of their payroll, their cost and their tier levels and stuff like that, and really have a value product that is going to entice people to come in. And sixth ed better just knock the socks off of people and not be, a confusing mess of reactions and multiple actions per round where it's just insane.
That is the challenge with moving into this kind of realm. If they do they remove the open gaming license from it in sixth ed, they are now taking complete ownership that we're going to release new and interesting content continuously, okay, to be able to supplement the loss of all that creative content that came out of the OGL. So like that is a risk that they're going to take with it, but it could be a great success. Who knows? I'm not part of the internal workings of Wizards of the Coast. We'll find out what happens with that. But if you aren't going to try out their new VTT, it sounds like you will probably not be able to play one D&D unless they release a hard copy of the book. Okay. Yeah. So if you want to they probably won't be, Roll20 probably won't be able to support the actual, models and stuff for it, but you can, create your own adventure that has them in there if you can buy the book. And I think it would be short-sighted of them not release a book for it, but maybe they won't. I don't know.
Yeah, they could make the printed books harder to find, or just release less copies of them to try and force people into switching to the VTT. But that's a short-sighted approach, and I don't think that's a good way to earn fans. I've got, shelves and shelves of books. I don't read all of the books. I like having them sometimes. And, if it's a good system, it's going to go up on a shelf somewhere. You should release the book. I think that if you're not going to switch, if you're, you can try the VTT when it comes out, and we'll know more about that in like a year or two. So there's tons of time before this is even a thing. It could be really cool. It could be a nightmare. If you don't want to play on the VTT, if you're going to play on your old VTT, yeah, you might not have access to 6 Ed, but there's a ton of old games, a ton of different games, a ton of new games. And with all this OGL craziness, there's a lot of people coming out of the works talking about new licenses that are available. Pathfinder Paizo is creating something called the Orc, which people are signing up for, which is another open gaming thing that they're handing off to a third party so they can't even mess with it. But really, I think the key here is that TTRPGs they don't exist in one space, and I think Wizards sort of lost that thread. A TTRPG exists in our minds. They're stories that we tell with our friends, and when a system stops being fun, we'll switch to a new one. And when a system, when a new system isn't fun, we'll either stick with an old one or we'll try something different. This happens all the time. And I think this is a bad choice. And they're going to really have to knock it out of the park with 6 Ed and this new VTT, or they're going to be, running the same issue that this has run for other companies before, where you make a couple of bad decisions and now you got to sell off your cash cow. So,
yeah, I mean that's a great point with the when I was looking at some commentary on this, that was one of the thought the big things was like if you don't need the rule book only exists to help you facilitate rules, but you could make up your own rules. I mean, you can homebrew, you can change things. It's there. It's a guideline set. So if you don't wish to follow along with what they have, you can do whatever the heck you want to do, or you can try a different. There's a bunch of different tabletop RPGs out there. D&D just happens to be one of the biggest ones. It just happens to be like the OG of it all. But there's so many other tabletop RPGs out there and so many different systems that do things differently or better depending on what you're trying to work on. And so yes, you can come up with your own system. Okay, like those 1-page sheet systems that you showed me a while ago. Those are somebody pulling something straight out of their ass. I mean, like. It's pretty much all of that. So if you've played one, you can basically facilitate rules for your own tabletop RPG. It might take more work, but you can do that, or you can just try a different one. There's so many other ones out there, which is what it sounded like a lot of the bigger content creators might have considered doing, is moving into other RPGs. And then you brought up it does leave a sour taste in your mouth when you see a company make a decision that's really I guess feels like it's really attacking the hobby that you've been playing. A lot of people, rightfully so, get upset with that, and the internet's a terrible place, and you will see the worst of humanity show up on the internet. So that's a take that with a grain of salt. People freaking out on the internet is some of it's for show, some of it's actual freak out. Would it have destroyed D&D? Probably not. Would it have changed the player base and the popularity of it? Probably. Okay, I could probably say that it might not have been the best thing on the block after they had made that decision. So that would, and so who knows? Maybe they're going to have to change things. But if they if this is a stunning failure, then we'll see what ends up happening with the next, what happens next with D&D. Who ends up taking it? Who will they have to sell it off? Probably not. I don't know. There's too many. Wizards of the Coast is more than just D&D. So.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't expect Wizards to sell it off. I would expect Hasbro to sell Wizards off if something really went poor. But it's one of those. um, seeing how these things are going to go is going to affect more than just Dungeons and Dragons. The other TTRPGs that are out there, like Pathfinder 2e, your Cyberpunk, your Shadowrun, different games that exist are going to take a look at this and they're going to notice how things progress. How do the fan bases react? And they're going to make decisions off of this. If Wizards can pull this off and make their own little VTT that is super popular and is the only place where you can get this thing, then you might see other systems try for it.
I was going to say, get ready to see a lot more people close off their gaming licenses and be like, we're doing our own VTT. Like if you like Pathfinder, you can be on Pathfinder to VTT or, whatever.
Or they'll partner up with one of them. Yeah. Like, Roll20 becomes the only place where you can get this game or that game. I don't see that being beneficial for the hobby or for anybody that wants to actually play games, because then you're going to end up with the whole streaming service issue. I've got Netflix and I've got Hulu and I've got Disney Plus and I've got HBO and I've got Paramount and I've got, because you want to see one thing off of one thing, then you got to have it all. So it could be a problem. I think that the pushback is a good thing. I think the community, and the internet freak out generally is not a good thing, but in this case might be beneficial in the long run. We'll see.
See how it ends up going. I mean, again, hopefully, we'll see we'll see where it goes. Maybe they change their mind on things. Maybe it just doesn't, pan out. Again, somebody's got a business plan out there somewhere. Somebody's got some models and projections with an arrow pointing up on a graph. So, that's
got to make that arrow go up.
Got to make that arrow point up. I had a joke about that a while ago. But anyway, this is very, very common stuff for businesses. And if it isn't this, they'll just keep releasing different editions of D&D. So get used to it. Anyways, you got anything else you want to add to this one?
I think the last thing I want to bring up on this is just like bring this back to being a DM. Bring this back to being the game master. Wizards tried to force its customers and its players and its partners to adhere to this new plan. It forgot that these people are D&D players. They're tabletop players. And what happens when you railroad players? They're going to do one of two things. They're going to buck the system, or they're going to quit playing. And
I feel like people flip the table over and quit playing.
How do you not see that? That's how people deal with railroading. That's what you guys did. I don't know. You got anything to say about this, Aaron?
No. Excellent episode on railroading we did back in the past. So go back and listen to that. You can really bring this full circle. That's going to wrap us up for this episode. If you have your thoughts on what was going on with the monetization in D&D, or maybe even the direction that D&D is going, levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, we are on YouTube, so smash that like button. Otherwise, subscribe to the podcast, recommend to a friend, review the podcast, all those good things. And that'll wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.